Who is ready to use their little gray cells to solve a murder? Hello, beautiful people of the internet. How are you doing today? My name is Jackie and welcome back to my YouTube channel. You guys, I am so excited because this is going to be the start of another trying to solve an Agatha Christie mystery video. And in this video, I'm going to attempt to solve Lord Edgware Dies. I am going to use my little gray cells just like Poirot and attempt to figure out who killed Lord Edgware. I did one of these videos previously for Murder at the Vicarage, the first Miss Marple mystery. I will link that in the card. And God, it was honestly so fun. I think this is probably it was probably one of my favorite videos I've ever filmed. So I've been looking forward to this all week long. I went to Walmart today and I bought a whiteboard and some colored markers. I am now planning to use this whiteboard for all my future trying to solve Agatha Christie videos. It's gonna be my murder solving whiteboard, okay? So obviously, spoilers for Lord Edgware Dies in this video. I will not be spoiling any other Agatha Christie mysteries, so do not worry about that. I started the book last night. I read 65 pages and we have already gotten to the murder, but first I'm going to introduce all the characters to you all. So I now have the characters we have met so far on the board and I color-coded with the different color markers. So red lines indicate people who are romantically involved, then blue for family members, green for people with a employer-employee relationship, and then purple for colleagues or friends. One of the good things about having the whiteboard is that I can erase and adjust over the course of the video because some of the characters we've met so far, we were not told their names, and honestly, some of these people, they may end up not even being important, but I just put them on the board just in case. So let's meet our murder victim, Lord Edgware. His full name is George Alfred St. Vincent Marsh, 4th Baron Edgware, and by the time this update is over, he will be dead. It's in the title, Lord Edgware Dies, so not a spoiler there, but Lord Edgware has been married twice, and his current wife is an actress named Jane Wilkinson. They have been estranged for about 18 months now, and she really wants to get a divorce. The first Lady Edgware left him during the course of their marriage and fled the country, leaving behind their 3-month-old baby, and the first Lady Edgware eventually died abroad. So that marriage clearly did not end well either. It also seems like Lord Edgware might have some interesting interests. In his library, he has books on medieval torture and the memoirs of the Marquis de Sade, the person from whom the term sadism derives. So Lord Edgware is into some weird stuff. So in the very first chapter of this book, Poirot and his friend Hastings are at the theater in London. Jane Wilkinson, the estranged wife of Lord Edgware, is an actress, and she has recently starred in several productions with an actor named Bryan Martin. Another colleague of theirs is Carlotta Adams, who is also an actress in London. She's an American by birth, but is currently performing in London, and it's mentioned that she is very good at impressions, and she can impersonate other people in a way that is so convincing it almost seems like she becomes somebody else. And the minute that was mentioned in the text, I was like, put a big star next to that. That's gonna be important. Bryan Martin, not a lot to say about him so far, but he has been in several productions with Jane, and he does not seem to have a very high opinion of Jane, even though they are friends. He says that she is a very self-interested person, and he fully believes she would murder someone if they were standing in her way. So that night after the theater, Jane, Bryan, Carlotta, and these other people, this married couple, Mr. and Mrs. Whitburn, and a man whose name was never revealed, were all dining together at the table next to Poirot and Hastings' table. So Jane Wilkinson then asks Poirot if she can hire him. She is desperate to get a divorce from Lord Edgware. She's asked him and he has refused, but she really needs to get rid of her husband because she is unhappy in her marriage and she wants to remarry to the Duke of Merton. We have not met the Duke on page yet, but I think he's probably going to pop up sooner or later. What we find out about him is that he is, quote, a young man of monkish tendencies, a violent Anglo-Catholic, and completely under the thumb of his mother being the Dowager Duchess of Merton, and I gotta believe these two are going to pop up in the story sooner or later. Jane basically all but says she would be willing to murder her husband if she had to get out of this marriage. She just wants him out of her life forever, and in some ways she thinks it would be nice if he could die because then she would never have to worry about him ever again and she could start a new life with her current lover, the Duke of Merton. So Poirot says, I can go talk to him if you would like, and so Poirot and Hastings go to visit Lord Edgware at his house. Now, Lord Edgware's secretary calls to say that the meeting needs to be rescheduled because the Baron is going to have to unexpectedly leave the country for Paris the next day, and he says that he is going to acquire a macabre work of art because, as we've established, Lord Edgware has some very gruesome interests. Now, I don't know if this is relevant, but it also mentions in passing that the Duke is currently in Paris. So Lord Edgware needs to go to Paris. That's where his wife's lover also is. That's a little sus. Now, Poirot and Hastings are quite surprised because when they go to talk to Lord Edgware and say, yeah, your wife wants a divorce, Lord Edgware doesn't put up a fight. He says, yeah, that's fine, we can get a divorce. I sent her a letter when she was in America 6 months ago telling her that I would agree to a divorce. And Jane says that she never received this letter from her husband. Now, could it have gotten lost in the mail? Possibly. But Poirot and I do not believe it. Is it possible that someone didn't want Jane to get this letter? Now, before we dive into the circumstances of the murder, there are a couple other characters who I put on the board for now, but I'm not sure how relevant to the plot they're going to be. I mentioned earlier Mr. and Mrs. Whitburn, who are a married couple who are friends with Carlotta. All we really know about them is that the two of them are very interested in the theater. Don't know if we're going to see them again. There is also another man with them that night when they all have dinner together, and it never says what his name is, but he is very intoxicated and he begins saying a lot of racist things to Hastings. So not a great guy. I do not know if he's going to come back into the story later. I do not believe they ever told us what his name is. And when Poirot and Hastings go to visit Lord Edgware, they also get a brief glimpse of his daughter. Now, as I mentioned before, the first Lady Edgware, the daughter's mother, left her husband when she was only 3 months old. Again, they haven't said what her name is yet, so I'll change it once we find out. Another interesting character, and I feel like Agatha is going somewhere with this. Lord Edgware has a butler, and this butler's name is not mentioned, but Hastings comments on how the butler looks vaguely familiar to him, and he has a very feminine voice. And I was, racking my brain about that. Who could this butler be? And as I was preparing for this video today, going over everything in my mind, I have an idea. What if Carlotta, our expert at impersonation, is for some reason or another disguising herself as Lord Edgware's butler? Now, I don't know why she would do this, what would be in it for her, but I just kept thinking about that mention of the butler having a very feminine voice. Like, why was that included in the text? I feel like maybe that could be why, but I also could be way off. I don't know. There's gotta be something with the identity of this butler. Oh, and the only other character I forgot to mention so far is Jane Wilkinson, the wife of Lord Edgware, has a lady's maid or housekeeper whose name is Ellis. And I don't know if she's gonna be an important character or not, but included her on the board anyways. So now let's get into the timeline for the crime. The day after their visit to Lord Edgware, Poirot and Hastings receive a visit from Inspector Japp. Now, Inspector Japp is a recurring character in the Poirot series. He works for the Scotland Yard police force, and he is a sometimes ally, sometimes adversary of Poirot. And Japp shows up to tell Poirot and Hastings that last night, Lord Edgware was murdered. According to Inspector Japp, it seems very likely that Jane Wilkinson murdered her husband, and he recounts the events of the night before as follows. According to him, Jane drove up in a taxi around 10 o'clock at night and asked to see her husband. She walked inside, and about 10 minutes later, the butler heard the front door shut. The butler assumed this was her leaving, though let's make it very clear that he did not actually see her leave. He just heard the door and assumed it was her. Around 11 p.m., the butler was locking up for the night, and when he saw the library was dark, he assumed his master went to sleep. The library was where Lord Edgware was when Jane stopped by to talk to him. Or the person that we believe was Jane, because we already know that Carlotta does a really good Jane impression. That's part of her act, so I'm just saying, like, suspicious. So around 11 p.m., the butler locks up the house, but the next morning, the housemaid finds Lord Edgware dead in the library, stabbed in the back of the neck. So we can't say for sure what time Lord Edgware was killed. You would assume it was in that 10-minute window where Jane came to visit him, but we don't know that for sure, I don't think. Is it possible that he could have gone back down to the library in the middle of the night or early in the morning and been killed then? So after this, Japp with Poirot and Hastings begin to investigate further, and they find out an interesting bit of information. Jane Wilkinson, Lady Edgware, was actually attending a dinner party the night of the murder. This was a dinner party hosted by Sir Montague Corner in Chiswick, and the dinner started at 8:30 p.m. Jane claims she was there the entire time, and she only got up from the table for about a minute because she was told there was someone on the telephone for her. All this person said to her was, "Is this Lady Edgware?" And when she responded yes, the person laughed and hung up. If Jane is telling the truth and the other dinner guests all are willing to testify that she was present that evening, how could she have shown up at the house at 10 p.m. to visit her husband? She was at a dinner party in a different part of town. It's also mentioned that Jane almost didn't go to this dinner party. She didn't feel like going, but Ellis convinced her that she should go anyways. So far, there is really one other plot point that I haven't mentioned yet, which could be important. So Bryan Martin, the co-star of Jane Wilkinson, goes to visit Poirot, and he wants to tell Poirot about something very strange which happened to him back in America. So Bryan Martin says that he was being stalked by this man with a gold tooth. The man kept appearing in different disguises, but he could always tell it was the same man because of the golden tooth. This man was about 30 years of age, and Poirot finds this very interesting for a reason that Bryan Martin, Hastings, and myself do not fully understand. Bryan Martin also hints that he thinks the reason this person with the golden tooth was shadowing him was due to a relationship he meaning Bryan Martin, had with an English girl while he was in London. He does not say who this English girl was. Could it have been Jane? Could it have been Carlotta? Who's to say? That is, I believe, everything that I have so far. So my first initial thoughts. If I had to guess somebody right now, and obviously it's too early to do so, I think Carlotta is very suspicious. Her ability to impersonate other people so convincingly just seems like she could, you know, possibly have committed a murder pretending to be someone else. Is she disguising herself as the butler? I don't know. Though you would think that when Jap interviews the butler, he would be able to tell if the butler was a man or a woman, but I don't know. Could it just be that maybe she was pretending to be the butler for one afternoon to kind of scope out the scene of the crime? I don't know, but I find the mention of the butler having a very feminine voice very suspicious. Another thing is, I do remember Mara from Books Like Woe talking about in one of her videos on Agatha Christie that in a lot of Agatha Christie books, the murderer is either a doctor or an actor. And in this book, we have 3 actors. So, you know, could be any one of them, but we know that Agatha Christie did not trust actors, and, you know, that's something to take into account. Okay, so I'm now about halfway through the book, and I have stuff to tell you. Most notably, Carlotta's dead. The person who I thought was most likely to be the murderer, yeah, she's dead. And like, I'm pretty sure she's dead because Poirot saw her body. So, yeah, I think she's actually really legitimately dead. So, there goes that theory, but I did get some things right. I'll explain. So, Inspector Jap talks with the people who are at the dinner party and confirmed Jane's alibi checks out. However, both the butler, whose name is Alton, and Miss Carroll, the secretary of the late Lord Edgware, both say they swear the woman they saw was her. Jap calls Alton a handsome chap. However, though Miss Carroll swears up and down it was Jane and she saw her face, Poirot determines that actually from where Miss Carroll was standing, she couldn't have seen Jane's face. She may have thought that it was really Jane, but it was impossible for her to have seen her face from that vantage point. We also find out that the new Lord Edgware, the person who will have inherited the title, is the late Lord Edgware's good-for-nothing nephew named Captain Ronald Marsh. Edgware's daughter, whose name is Geraldine, was at the opera the night of the murder, so Alton the butler left the front door unbolted. She came in at around 11:45, bolted the door behind her, and it was still locked when they checked in the morning. There are believed to be only 2 keys to the house, one which was always with Lord Edgware, and the other which Geraldine took when she went out that night. There had been a third, but Ronald, the nephew, lost the key. He used to live with his uncle until about 3 years ago. They had a falling out because Ronald accrued a bunch of debts that his uncle was not willing to pay off. We find out that Ronald is a little bit irresponsible, you know, he loves to have fun, but then he ends up owing a lot of people a lot of money. Now, Poirot believes that whoever called Jane Wilkinson while she was at the dinner party was not the murderer. It had to have been a different person because why would the murderer want to verify that Jane was at the dinner party establishing an alibi? Whoever was the real murderer clearly wanted to set Jane up and make everyone think she was the one who came to the house when really it wasn't her. Poirot is convinced that it was Carlotta, the gifted mimic, was the one who posed as Jane the night of the murder. Now, he doesn't think that she was the murderer, but he thinks whoever was behind the crime asked her to pretend to be Jane. Poirot and Hastings rush to see Carlotta, but upon their arrival, they find out from her maid that Carlotta died the night before, seemingly of an accidental overdose of sleeping draught. Of course, Poirot doesn't believe this was an accident. He believes that the murderer killed Carlotta so she could not expose him or her. Poirot and Hastings do discover the clothes that Jane was wearing the night of the murder in an attaché case in Carlotta's room. Like I said, Poirot does go and look at Carlotta's body, so it seems like she's dead. Like, she's not faking it, she's legitimately dead. Carlotta's maid tells Poirot and Hastings that the night of the murder, Carlotta put on the outfit and left the house seeming very pleased about something. She didn't tell her maid where she was going or who she was going to see, but she didn't seem like she was upset. She then returned around midnight or shortly after midnight, which is strange because the murder is believed to have been committed around 10 p.m. Carlotta, masquerading as Jane, left the house around 10 p.m. supposedly. So where did she go after that? She didn't get home again until midnight. The maid also says that Carlotta tried to call someone when she got home, but she didn't get through to them, and she said she was too tired, so she was going to call again in the morning. Now, the maid claims that the milk Carlotta drank before going to bed could not have been tampered with because the maid herself also drank from that milk, but the maid does admit that she left Carlotta for a few minutes to go to the post office. So the doctor who came after Carlotta was found dead did discover the sleeping draught, a substance known as Veronal, in Carlotta's possession. The container is labeled, quote, CA from D, Paris, November 10th, Sweet Dreams. November having been 6 months before the events of the story. Now, another strange thing is that Poirot and Hastings find glasses with Carlotta's things, but Carlotta didn't wear glasses and neither does Jane, so it couldn't have been part of her disguise. The doctor says that these glasses seem to have belonged to someone who was very short-sighted. Poirot and Hastings then go to visit this woman named Jenny Driver. She is a friend of Carlotta's who owns a hat shop, and Carlotta had lunch with her the day of both Lord Edgware's murder and her untimely death. Jenny says that Carlotta had just purchased a new hat from her, and this hat was designed specifically to cover the left half of Carlotta's face. This is likely because Jane had a mole on the left side of her face, so in order for Carlotta to successfully pass herself off as Jane, she would need something to cover up that mole, or more specifically, the lack of the mole. As far as this friend is aware, Carlotta did not know Lord Edgware and had never met him, but she did about a month ago say to her friend that she didn't think it was right that Lord Edgware could get away with ruining people's lives like this. And she apparently told her friend, if someone killed him, the world would be better off for it. Some other information we learn from this friend, Jenny. Carlotta apparently has a, quote, delicate little sister she's very protective of, and she visited Paris in November. She also apparently knew Bryan Martin, the actor who has been working with Jane, since they were children, but in recent years she said that basically she thought Bryan got a big head and he wasn't the same person she knew when they were children. So Poirot and Hastings then go to interview Geraldine Marsh, the daughter of the late Lord Edgware. She wants to know why Poirot went to visit her father shortly before his murder, believing that her father may have been afraid of someone, but she seems relieved when Poirot tells her no, actually it was Jane, not her father, who hired him. Geraldine also admits that she hated her father and she's not sad that he's dead. She believes whoever killed him might have had a good reason for it. So here's a juicy tidbit. Ronald Marsh, the nephew of the late Lord Edgware and the new Lord Edgware, shows up at the house when Poirot and Hastings are there, and Hastings immediately recognizes Ronald Marsh as the mystery man who was at Jane Wilkinson's supper party. So that was Ronald Marsh who was at the party and just generally being a drunken, racist piece of shit. That was him. When he's speaking to Poirot and Hastings, Ronald has a pretty joking, cavalier attitude about his uncle's murder, and he admits that The day before, he had visited his uncle to ask for money. However, he says he could not possibly have committed the murder because that night he was attending the opera with some people. And that to me is interesting because supposedly Geraldine was also at the opera. Were they at the same opera? Finally, Miss Carroll, the secretary, tells Poirot and Hastings that Lord Edgware enjoyed terrorizing people, and so she totally understands why Jane wanted to get out of the marriage. Though she doesn't like Jane and never has, she acknowledges that Lord Edgware really just got off on being mean to people in his life. He loved feeling like he had power over others, and was just, generally speaking, a total ass. So I am now about 50% of the way through the book, and Poirot and Hastings are currently going to speak with Sir Montague Corner, the man who threw the dinner party Jane attended the night of her husband's murder. And since my top suspect is now seemingly dead, I guess I need another theory. And to be honest, I don't really have a good one. I want to sit here and say that I am totally confident, but I'm not confident in anything at this point. Here is my best guess, and I have no confidence in this theory. But now, with Carlotta seemingly ruled out, I'm turning my attention a little bit to Ronald Marsh and his cousin Geraldine. Now, I do think it's suspicious that they both claim they were at the opera the night of the murder, and these glasses were found among Carlotta's possessions. Could they potentially have been opera glasses? Apparently the person who had the glasses was very nearsighted, short-sighted, I believe is the word was used. So maybe the point of the glasses was to be able to see the stage better. Why one or both of them would have wanted to kill Lord Edgware? I mean, Geraldine admits that she hated her dad. Ronald was going to inherit the title from him, which would have helped him with his money woes. Maybe the two of them have the hots for each other. Yes, I know that they're first cousins, but like, this was the 1900s. It was okay back then. People didn't think that was weird. So maybe the two of them conspired together to get Lord Edgware out of the way because they thought it would be mutually beneficial for the two of them if he were dead. Maybe they even hoped to get married, but they knew that Lord Edgware would never approve. They did live together for a time, so it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that two of them could have developed a close relationship during the period where Ronald was living with them. Like I said, I'm not confident in that theory at all. The glasses are really the one thing causing me to start looking in that direction. I also still think something is up with this damn butler. I mean, I guess he can't actually be Carlotta, because Carlotta is very, very dead, but he still seems suspicious to me. We even get a comment in these chapters from Miss Carroll talking about how she's never liked Alton, but she doesn't know why exactly. She just has always gotten a bad vibe, basically. And I don't know, I think it's very weird that Hastings mentions specifically that the butler has a feminine voice, and we also get a passing comment from Inspector Japp about what a handsome chap he is. Maybe this is just me reading too much into it, but I'm suspicious. I don't really know where Alton fits into this whole thing, but there's something off there. All right, I think that is it for tonight, everyone. I am halfway through this book and I do not have a strong theory at all, but I am really enjoying it for the most part so far, and I look forward to talking to you again tomorrow. Good night. You guys, I am really confused. I do not have a solid theory about who the murderer is at this point, and there are a lot of things that I just don't know how they all fit together. I'm not feeling confident about my ability to solve this case at this moment. So, in the chapter that I just read, Poirot and Hastings go to visit Sir Montague Corner, and Sir Montague is the one who was hosting the dinner party that Jane Wilkinson attended the night her husband was murdered. And while they're there, they talk to Sir Montague's butler. So remember, the night of the dinner party, Jane received a call, and the person on the other end of the phone said to her, "Are you Lady Edgware?" And when she responded that she was, they started laughing. So the butler says he's the one who first answered the phone and told Jane to come take the telephone call. And he says that the person who placed the call was a woman who sounded somewhat foreign. And here's the other interesting thing, is Poirot asks him, did the person ask specifically for Jane Wilkinson or Lady Edgware? And the butler responds, specifically for Lady Edgware. So this is what that made me think of. What if, I know this sounds crazy, but we know Lord Edgware was married before to Geraldine's mother, who supposedly died abroad. Is it possible she's not dead? So maybe that's why the person on the phone laughed when Jane responded that she was Lady Edgware, because if the first Lady Edgware is still alive and the marriage was never dissolved, then she was never the real Lady Edgware at all. Now, if that's the case, who is the real Lady Edgware? I don't know. Like, is she the murderer? I don't know. But just when Poirot asked for the specific verbiage, that's what that made me think of. She could be masquerading as Miss Carroll. I think Miss Carroll's in her 40s, so that's possible. But surely Lord Edgware would recognize her? Is Ellis the maid actually the real Lady Edgware? I don't know. But just the phrasing of Poirot's question, did the person specifically ask for Jane Wilkinson or Lady Edgware? That's what that made me think of, and I don't know. I don't know. I could be totally off base here. Now, I don't know if this is going to be relevant or not, but also at Sir Montague's, they run into Mr. and Mrs. Woodburn, the friends who dined with them that evening of the murder, and this Scottish actor whose name is Donald Ross. And one thing that Donald Ross said is really interesting is he comments to Poirot and Hastings, there were 13 of us at dinner that night. And I don't know if you know this, but there is an old superstition that if 13 people have dinner together, the first person to stand up from the table will be the next one of them to die. And Hastings asks him, well, who got up from the table first? Donald Ross says, it was me, actually. Now, was it actually Donald Ross? Because if Jane got up to get to the phone, maybe technically she was actually the first one to get up from the dinner table. But the reason that I flagged this moment is because this book, Lord Edgware Dies, was also previously published as 13 at Dinner. So why was that the original title? Like, you would think if they were titling this book, they wouldn't title it after an incident that's really not that important. I also have another random thought while we're on the subject. Why, if Lord Edgware was stabbed and Carlotta died of an overdose, is there a gun on the cover of this book? Because so far, nobody in this book has died by gunshot. So why did they put that on the cover? Very suspicious. So then Poirot and Hastings get a visit from Inspector Japp. And Inspector Japp says that he has confirmed the alibis of Ronald Marsh and Geraldine Marsh. And he has some other interesting information where he says Lord Edgware's key to get into the house is now missing. Another thing is that because Lord Edgware was planning to go to Paris the next day, he cashed a check for £100 in French currency. But Miss Carroll told Japp that this money is now missing. Japp also makes a comment about how Ronald was acting very suspicious, almost like he wanted to be suspected of the murder. Just maybe he's protecting someone? I don't know. I threw it out there that maybe there's an attachment between Geraldine and Ronald. Maybe he believes that Geraldine could potentially be the murderer, and so he wants to divert suspicion away from her. Or, you know, maybe it's the tried and true Agatha Christie trope of someone trying to make themselves look guilty early in an investigation when there's not enough evidence to convict them, hoping then they'll be able to get off. I don't know, but it seemed like a weird comment to make. So now let's go back to Alton, the very suspicious butler. So Japp comes back the next day and says Alton has pulled a runner, he's disappeared, very suspicious, and Japp also has discovered that Alton was involved with some illegal activities at disreputable nightclubs. So Alton is now looking very suspicious because he has seemingly disappeared after the murder. I really do think there's something up with Alton, and I don't know if he's who he claims to be, but now they're starting to make him look suspicious, which makes me think he's not the murderer, but still definitely hiding something. Then Poirot also makes a comment that Alton the butler bears a striking resemblance to Bryan Martin. What do I do with this information? I have so many little different ideas and I have no idea how to make them all fit together in one theory. I'm suspicious, based on that phone call, is the First Lady Edgware still living? That's my new theory based on Poirot's line of questioning. But if so, is she masquerading as one of the other characters in the story? What about that subplot involving the English girl Bryan Martin was involved with and the man with the gold tooth who was stalking him? How is that relevant to all of this? Who is Alton? Because he is clearly hiding something. And why does he look like Bryan Martin? I'm just very confused. I don't know how to make all of this work together. And I still have my eye on Ronald and Geraldine because Carlotta having glasses in her possession for someone who is short-sighted, that to me indicates potentially opera glasses, so that is suspicious. But if that's really that's what it is, how does it fit in with the other evidence? And what is the significance of 13 at dinner? I don't know. I really am not optimistic about my chances to solve this case. I am enjoying myself. I just don't know if I'm gonna figure this one out. Okay, everybody, I think it's about the time where I have to lock in my guess because I think Poirot is going to reveal whodunit any minute now, but to be completely honest with you, I don't feel super confident. I have been confused almost this entire book, and I do think I might be able to guess whodunit, but I don't have a fully fleshed out theory, more so just different suspicion. So even if I somehow guess right, I feel like I only deserve half credit for this. I don't have a fully formed theory. But first, let me summarize what has happened in the last few chapters that I read. So, the Duke and his mother, the Dowager Duchess, are back in London, and the Dowager Duchess visits Poirot, and she wants Poirot's help to ensure that her son doesn't marry Jane Wilkinson. She doesn't think the two of them are going to be well suited, but Poirot says, "I'm sorry, Jane is already my client. That's a conflict of interest. I cannot help you." Poirot also says he's starting to believe that the killer's motive wasn't necessarily to get rid of Lord Edgware. It was more so that they wanted to frame Jane, and so killing Lord Edgware was really their means of getting back at her. So, Japp, Poirot, and Hastings interview a taxi driver, and this is the taxi driver's story. The night of the murder, he picked up a lady and a gentleman from the opera house. He drove them to the neighborhood where Lord Edgware lived, and the woman went into the house first. Then, several minutes later, the man went in after her. They both returned to the taxi and asked the taxi driver to take them back to the opera house. The taxi driver is given photographs to see if he can identify the man and woman he picked up. He positively identifies Geraldine Marsh, and he does not identify Ronald Marsh, but he does point to someone who looks very much like Ronald Marsh, and the Ronald Marsh photo they have on hand is a little bit out of date. So it's still possible that it was Ronald. They have also received a copy of the letter that Carlotta sent to her sister in America. And reading the letter, it seems to imply that Ronald Marsh was the one who hired Carlotta to pose as Jane in exchange for $10,000. So Scotland Yard is ready to arrest Ronald for the murder, but this is his story. He says that he ran into Geraldine at the opera that evening, just by accident, and he began talking to her about his money troubles. Geraldine said that she would give Ronald these pearls that once belonged to her mother, and he could sell them to pay off his debts. Ronald accepted the offer, and so the two of them got into the taxi so Geraldine could retrieve the pearls for him. While Geraldine went inside the house, Ronald waited outside, and then something strange happened. A man walked past him, and Ronald claims this man looked a lot like a famous actor. The man walked in the direction of the house, and Ronald thought that possibly he went into Lord Edgware's house, so Ronald decided he was going to go in the house after the man. Ronald had his own key. It was the key that he believed to have lost many years ago, but then he found it again. Ronald says he went in the house after Geraldine, but didn't see any signs of this man. He also says, how could I have been the one who hired Carlotta? I don't have $10,000. I have no money. And Poirot says he believes Ronald. Also, we find out that Geraldine kind of has the hots for her cousin Ronald, so I wasn't off there. Like, that was accurate. So, remember, Ronald claims this man who walked past him on the sidewalk looked a lot like a famous actor. And what famous actor do you think that was? Bryan Martin. However, the thing is, Jap says, well, it couldn't have been Bryan Martin because Bryan Martin was having dinner with a woman out of town that night, that woman being Jenny Driver, the friend of Carlotta's who owns the hat shop. She was mentioned earlier, and I added her to the board. Seems like she is romantically involved with Bryan Martin. So Poirot begins to suspect the case that Carlotta had, which had the whole From D thing on it, was recently acquired because none of her friends recognized this as something that Carlotta owned. He begins doing some investigating to find out how Carlotta received this item. Then Poirot has another realization. The letter that Carlotta sent to her sister was torn, and he believes that the real killer tore the letter intentionally because, based on the way it's been ripped, it now reads as if she's saying Ronald Marsh was the one who hired her, when really there's a gap between those two paragraphs, and she's saying that the he who hired her is not Ronald Marsh, it's another person that would have been mentioned in the missing section. You follow what I'm saying? So, like, the letter mentions Ronald Marsh. Then there's another section that has been ripped out, and then the part that we pick up again, it says, he hired me to do this. And because this section is missing, you, the reader, are going to assume that by he, she means Ronald Marsh. But no, she means somebody who was mentioned in the missing section. Then Hastings, Jane, the Duke, and a whole bunch of other people all attend a luncheon held by Mrs. Whitburn. Donald Ross, the Scottish actor, is also present, and when they start talking about Paris at the luncheon, this triggers some sort of memory in Donald Ross. He tells Hastings that he believes he might have information to help Poirot, and Hastings tells him to swing by later that day at 5 p.m. when Poirot will be home. That evening, Donald Ross calls Poirot, but he puts down the receiver in the middle of the conversation and never picks it up again. Yes, you know where this is going, don't you? Poirot and Hastings rush to Donald Ross's residence, but once they get there, they find that he has been stabbed in the neck, very similar to how Lord Edgware was killed. Now it's time to propose my theory, and to be completely honest, I think I might be kind of right, but it's not a well-formed theory, so even if I guess the whodunit correctly, I don't think I deserve full credit for this. I really thought it was Ronald and or Geraldine, and now that Ronald is looking very, very guilty, I think it's not actually him and he's actually telling the truth. So that eliminates him from suspicion. God, my first number one suspect was Carlotta, who was then murdered, and then my next number one suspect was Ronald, who was then arrested. So it really seems like my number one suspects just keep being eliminated from consideration. So With that being said, I guess I am going to go with the first Lady Edgware is still alive and she is somehow behind this theory. And out of all the characters in this book, I think really only two people could potentially be Lady Edgware in disguise. That's either Miss Carroll or Ellis, Jane Wilkinson's maid, and considering Miss Carroll saw Lord Edgware all the time, I don't think it could be her, which means by process of elimination, I guess I think Ellis is the real Lady Edgware and she's the murderer? So we still have some questions here, right? First of all, who is the D that sent this to Carlotta? We could say D is for Jenny Driver. It could have been D for Donald, but he's now dead. Or it could be D for Duke or D for Duchess. Or I guess we don't know Ellis's first name. All we know is that her name is Ellis, if that's even her real name. So maybe her first name starts with D. Maybe it's her. I don't know. I mean, Poirot and Hastings have assumed that D is a man, but we don't know that for sure. So maybe Ellis is the mystery D. If it's not her, then I think it's D for Duke of Merton. And I guess I'm gonna say, okay, I think it's Ellis, and Alton was her accomplice for some reason. And so it was mentioned earlier that Alton looks a lot like Bryan Martin, right? So perhaps the person who passed Ronald Marsh on the sidewalk was not Bryan Martin, but Alton, who bears a striking resemblance to him. Now, why would Alton be helping Ellis / Lady Edgware with this? I don't have a clue, but I've thought something was suspicious about him the entire time. I think since it was specifically mentioned that Alton looks a lot like Bryan Martin, that has to be relevant somehow. Like, I don't think it was brought up in the text for no reason. I think there has to be a bigger meaning behind that. So that's my final guess, and I think I could be right, but even if I am, I don't think I deserve full credit for this answer, because really, I was wrong so many times before I was right, and even now as I present you this theory, there's a lot I still don't know. But I guess I'll read through to the end, and then I'll come back to tell you how the story is resolved. Also, we still haven't had anyone be murdered by gunshot. Why is there a gun on the cover of this book? I don't know, maybe will the killer like shoot themselves in the climax once they're confronted with their dastardly crimes? I don't know, I don't understand why there's a gun on this cover. There hasn't been a gun in the book yet, and it's basically over. Well, I was wrong. Okay, I'm gonna explain all of it now. So, first things first, Bryan Martin's story about the man with the gold tooth, complete crap. He made the entire thing up, copied the plot from an old Hollywood movie. But you see, Bryan was pissed at Jane because originally the two of them had been romantically involved, and then she dumped him because she was now in love with the Duke. So Bryan wanted to get his revenge by making Jane look suspicious. That's why the day after the dinner party at the Savoy Hotel, he was saying all these things to Poirot, talking about how he fully believed Jane was capable of murder. He wanted to make her look guilty because he wanted revenge against her. So Bryan lied, but he's not the murderer. You know who is the murderer? Jane Wilkinson. Now, I know, you're saying, how is this possible? She was at the dinner party. But it wasn't her who was at the dinner party. It was Carlotta masquerading as Jane at the dinner party. The two of them switched clothes, so Jane went to see her husband and Carlotta posed as Jane at the dinner party. The phone call was from Jane to Carlotta as Jane to find out if the plan had been uncovered. So it was a staged call. And Inspector Jack mentioned earlier in the book that he believed the people at the dinner party when they said that Jane was really there, because a lot of the people at the party didn't know her that well, so why would they lie? Yeah, and also, since they didn't know her that well, they didn't realize it was actually Carlotta, not Jane. It was just Carlotta pretending to be Jane. So, naturally, Jane had to get rid of Carlotta so that their plan could never be revealed. And Poirot realizes that the letter, when it was ripped, originally said she, but now, because of how it was ripped, it looked like it said he. The person who hired Carlotta to pretend to be Jane was not a he, it was a she. Also, the night of the murder, Alton returned home and he saw his master's dead body. He didn't kill him, but he seized that opportunity to steal from his dead boss. He then dropped the money off with a friend of his for safekeeping and returned to the house. He was the person that Ronald saw and who he believed to be Bryan Martin, since they looked so similar. But here was the problem. So, the woman who claimed to be Jane Wilkinson at the dinner party was a very educated woman. She knew so much about history and mythology. But at that luncheon hosted by Mrs. Whitburn, somebody mentioned the Judgment of Paris, the event from mythology, and the real Jane, hearing the mention of Paris, didn't realize they were talking about Paris, the mythological person, and started talking about Paris, the city. Now, Donald Ross, who had been at that dinner party with Jane, got a little bit suspicious, and he began to suspect, wait, maybe that wasn't the real Jane, because that woman knew so much about history and mythology, and this person thinks that Paris the man and Paris the city are the same place. So that's the information that he was killed for. Jane realized that he was getting a little suspicious, and so she offed him before he could say anything to Poirot about it. As for the glasses that were found with Carlotta's possessions, these were glasses that Jane stole from her maid Ellis to get to the meetup with Carlotta without being recognized. She accidentally left the glasses behind after they changed clothes. And Jane's motive for the entire thing was she wanted to marry the Duke of Merton, who, as we mentioned earlier, is a staunch Catholic. Catholics don't believe in divorce, so she didn't think the Duke would marry her if she got a divorce. She thought she needed to be a widow to get him to marry her. So I was wrong. Yeah, I didn't see that coming at all. I did get a couple of things right along the way, but the whodunit, yeah, I had no clue. I think that pretty much ties up all the loose ends here. Wow, guys, I did a terrible job trying to solve this, but it was a lot of fun, and I definitely want to do this again sometime. Actually, no, there is one loose end. Still no explanation as to why there's a gun on this book cover. Nobody died by gunshot in this book. So I had so much fun making this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. My social media links are down below if you want to follow me on Tumblr, Instagram, or be my friend on Goodreads. If you have read this book, do let me know in the comment section, and let me know, when you read it, were you able to solve the mystery? Because I think this was a really tricky one. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you have a mesmerizing rest of your day. Bye, and I'll see you in the next one.